This magnificent building just behind me often has different art exhibitions, and I'm never quite sure what to find, so it's open. Let's go and have a look and see what they've got on today. I think just from outside it looks like we've got Joan Miró today. Some of his works do require a little bit of interpretation. Some of them rather grand in scale. This one must be over 2 meters tall. There is a Miro museum near to the Majorca Palace, the King's summer residence here in Palma, just almost next door to the school where I taught. Very interesting and different. The building itself is worth coming in, whether you're interested in the art or not, but certainly the actual building and these wonderful columns at the moment, the ceiling is quite magnificent. These sort of things, you've got to look at them at all different angles. Reminiscent of some of the things you see in the Baleares Museum near to Alcudia. You've got to use your imagination quite a lot. This exhibition's been here for a while, because I'm pretty sure I've seen in the papers the King and Queen coming to see them. I'm guessing they had an expert on hand who could explain just what they are. I see an owl there. That's what I'm supposed to see. There is a big poster which I look around the other side of, which has got some sort of an explanation. A lot of writing. I'll take a photograph of it. Well, whenever there's an exhibition on, it's always interesting and often very curious, and that one definitely is interesting and curious. I don't know what you made out of it, but it's all a bit beyond me, I think. I don't really quite follow modern art, but interesting nonetheless. Anyway, thanks for watching that bit, and I'm going to be moving on now.
So when you hear the name Joan Miró, what comes to mind? Probably those amazing, surreal, colorful paintings, right? But what if I told you there's a whole other side to this modern master? That's what we're doing today. We're going to look past the famous canvas and dive into his powerful, kind of mysterious world of sculpture. And let's just dive right in with a quote from the man himself. He said, "It is through sculpture that I will create a truly phantasmagorical world of living monsters." Whoa, I mean, living monsters. This tells you right away this wasn't just some casual hobby for him. Even way back in the 40s, he had this incredible, almost startling ambition to make something that would literally leap off the canvas and, well, into our world. So that just begs the question, right? Why? I mean, why would one of the most famous painters of the 20th century suddenly feel this pull towards the solid physical world of sculpture? What was he after that he couldn't get from painting alone? Well, it turns out he wasn't just interested in making objects to sit on a pedestal inside some quiet gallery. No way. He actually envisioned his art living and breathing out in the real world, actually becoming a part of the landscape. He literally wanted his sculptures to have a conversation with the trees and the rocks and the coastline itself. It's such a cool idea. But a vision this big, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a real journey for him, one that evolved over decades, and it all started with some pretty small, humble beginnings. And you can really see how this all unfolded over time. He kind of dipped his toes in the water back in the 40s, making these small, earthy figures. But then fast forward to 1956, and things get really serious when he sets up his new workshop in Majorca. And then, and this is the cool part, in the late 60s and early 70s, he goes back to those early ideas, but now he's transforming them into these huge, monumental bronze works. It was this slow, super deliberate process of refining an idea and just making it bigger, more powerful. And it's so important to get this. This was not just a painter's hobby. Not at all. Miro took sculpture incredibly seriously. I mean, he studied the masters like Arp and Giacometti, he had serious technical chops, and he was involved in the entire process, from picking the exact right foundry for a piece all the way to applying that final patina himself. He was absolutely a master craftsman, just as much as he was an artist. Okay, so if he's this master craftsman making these living monsters, where did the ideas for these strange, powerful shapes actually come from? The answer wasn't in some dusty book or in another artist's studio. Nope. It was right outside his door. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? Nature is the soul. For Miró, nature was, it was everything. The countryside, the earth, all the little objects he'd find on his walks, these weren't just pretty backdrops for him. They were the very soul of his work. They were the engine, the driving force behind every single sculpture he made. His whole creative process was this amazing mix of, extreme patience and pure spontaneity. He'd go out and collect stuff, a cool stone, a twisted root, maybe a random piece of metal, and he would just live with them. He'd spend ages just looking at them, thinking about their forms. And then, when the time was right, he'd start building, almost automatically, just letting his gut guide him to create these huge, imposing figures that, in his mind, were always destined to live back out in nature. So out of this really unique process came these heavy, powerful figures. But they weren't just sculptures of things. They were created to embody this really deep, primal idea that Miro himself called the initial force. Yeah, la fuerza inicial, the initial force. This right here, this is the key to unlocking his sculptures. He was trying to capture something totally elemental, that feeling of the raw, wild power of the earth itself, and express it through these heavy, solid, unmoving shapes. It's almost like he was giving the weight of the world a physical form. So just to be super clear, he wasn't sculpting a person or a bird or anything literal like that. He was sculpting an energy. He actually described it as a poetic power, something phosphorescent, like a comet or a star. How cool is that? So it was way less about what the sculpture looked like and much more about the deep, almost cosmic connection to the earth it was meant to represent. And what's so great is that this powerful idea is still alive and kicking today. His whole vision has been brought to life in an exhibition that's actually called, you guessed it, The Initial Force. His massive sculptures are placed exactly where he wanted them to be, not just cooped up in museums, but out in the world, creating this incredible, dreamlike journey through both cityscapes and natural landscapes. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on, right? Miro's whole goal was to free his art, to let it just merge with the elements. And it really makes you wonder, what does happen to art when it breaks out of the gallery? When it's not confined by 4 white walls anymore? How does its meaning, its power, even its soul, change when it gets to live right alongside us, out there among the trees and the rocks?
Stone remembers what the hand forgets before the sign, before the name. There was weight, there was pressure, there was a form learning how to stand.
Not image, not story, only the urge to rise.
This is the first force, the breath before speech, the dark shape calling itself alive. Here in the vault of silence, matter dreams of meaning and stands. Bronze carries the echo of touch, birds without sky, bodies without time. They do not move, yet everything moves around them.
Gravity listens, light obeys.
This is the first force, older than thought, a scar of creation left standing upright between stone and shadow. A question hardens into form.
No beginning is gentle, no form arrives whole. Everything that endures was once pressure.
This is the first force untranslated, patient still. What remains when meaning falls away and form refuses to